I was trying to think, like, what was the thing from Boy State that I used to say? I know that you used to. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, fantastic. Welcome to Amidon Planet, George. How are you?
I am doing great. I haven't heard you say the word fantastic in a long time.
Yeah. That was my like go-to word, like fantastic. Yes.
Yep.
Everything.
You
Everything
would
is
always say
fantastic.
it underneath your breath just as something was going down. It's like, oh no, fantastic.
Fantastic. Ugh. So yeah, George, I was calling back to thinking about how we first met. And again, I think it was I first met you, I want to say 1998, maybe
Mhm.
97, 98.
It
I
was
was
in the 90s, yeah.
my first year as a counselor. And I don't know if you were a counselor that year or you just came by to visit, but I remember you waking up our dormitory with your keyboard plugged
I was,
in to 11. And
yeah. I was a counselor, so I just wouldn't randomly drive to Ripon, Wisconsin to
that's
Ripon
right.
College and wake up a dorm full of summer camp guys. So
Yeah, yeah. And Badger Boy State, for those, well, actually, now a lot of people know what Badger Boy State is because you can point to that Boys State documentary that was on
yep,
Apple Plus, and a lot of people
yep,
saw
yep.
that. But yeah, 900 junior rising seniors like getting together
Yes,
to make a mythical 51st state called Badger.
exactly. Yes, ever since 1939, the
Wow.
American Legion created that program. And response initially to Hitler's Nazi youth programs, and it eventually evolved into the leadership program that it is. And every state except Hawaii. Hawaii is the only one that doesn't have a boys' state.
Which, we could go there and
I, I
volunteer to
think there's,
start it.
I think it would be a fantastic idea.
That's right. How many years were you? I think I was a counselor for 13 years, if I
This
put them
June
all
will be
together.
my 25th year. My
Wow.
25th, yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah.
I
On and
see a
off. I
plaque
mean,
coming here.
yeah, well, yeah, there'll be something etched on a piece of glass, and you'll go up and shake somebody's hand and smile for the camera.
That's right.
And there'll be a reception afterwards, and there'll be cookies and cake. So,
That's right. Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, it seems like I mean, I was trying to like describe, who George Maurer is. And like, I think your website does it says what musician, performer, multimedia artist. I was going
mhm.
to say storyteller, um,
Yep,
adventure bicyclist.
yep, yep.
I
And
mean, what
and
what
that's
else what else could we capture there?
I'm relearning how to play the theremin, so you can say theraminist
Thereminist.
for a music creating new music for a show coming up. So and Wurlitzer theater organ player. I'm taking organ lessons to learn how to play pedals with my feet, so I can
Wow.
do some shows across the country in a lot of these theaters that have restored Wurlitzer organs. So
Wow. That's awesome. Well, and
yeah.
I know we I was trying to like just even capture some of the experience I have with your music and like so the George Maurer trio, right? The George Maurer
hmm
group,
Jazz group, yeah.
jazz group.
We're in our 25th year as a band.
Wow. Wow. That-
All eight of us still together.
That's, and is that the same group that would do some of the Christmas albums?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sniff the Mitten is my
Sniff the
favorite
Mitten.
one.
For those that know Spinal Tap, it's a
That's
little bit
right.
of a riff off of Spinal Tap. And
Yeah.
Jazz Nog was the first one.
Yes, I have both.
Jazz Nog. Yep.
So like George has been in my household every Christmas, so we pull out those and just love that.
Oh,
But I
that's
mean,
awesome.
and and again, just trying, I mean, that's just one part of it, but then also too, you toured with Bobby V for
Yep.
many years,
Uh,
like,
yeah, a number of years I was his music director and orchestrator. Bobby V was a 60s pop icon. He charted a bunch of hits in the 60s. Take Good Care of My Baby. I'm Like a Rubber Ball, Come Bouncing Back to You, Devil or Angel. It goes on.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, and then through him and his sons, who kind of run all of that, I've had the opportunity to work with the original lead cast of Broadway's Jersey Boys, the guys that opened the show on Broadway, and they went on to do their own deal and symphony shows. So things I never thought I would find myself doing, like learning how to play a theremin,
There.
uh, or orchestrating for full symphony orchestra. But I was a composition major, and jazz musicians are improvisers, so we say yes, and then we figure out how to do it later.
Yeah.
And I think that's the great approach to adventure bicycling too. So it's just to say, yeah, I can do that, and then figure it out
Yeah.
later.
Well, it's like, and
Just
we'll put a link to it in the show notes, but there's an awesome like overview video that you have that kind of
Mhm.
describes like, hey, did all this and now
Yep,
adventure bicyclist. So it's like,
yeah,
that's pretty.
something I never expected to be doing in my life
Yeah.
at all.
So what even started that? So what, like, okay, so you doing the music stuff. I'm guessing you learned how to ride a bike as a youngin, but then like,
Yep.
okay, so then what led to these bike adventures?
Well, this is the story I tell, and actually, I'm broadcasting to you from my live virtual studio that I appear on a lot of smart boards across the U.S. in classrooms over the last couple of years, especially during the pandemic, and for
Yeah.
about a year out of that. And so when that question gets asked, I turn to a little bit of my technology. So I'm going to use a little bit of audio visual here and
Okay.
kind of tell you how I got into that. And I think I got the volume right. But this is my friend Carolyn, and she was a school teacher from Little Falls, Minnesota. And one summer she decided she's going to bike all the way across the United States from Seattle to Boston. And she was 48 years old. She decided to raise some funds for the Boys and Girls Clubs at Little Falls, Minnesota. And at the end of this adventure, she realized that she just biked across the United States, something she never expected herself to do. So she did other big things in her life, like learning how to play baseball at the age of 70 while battling cancer.
Oh wow.
And she died a year later. I had known her for many years because she would come to all my concerts. And so I decided that I was going to follow in her footsteps and raise some funds for cancer research. And built a bike, and her husband dropped me off at the same place he had dropped her off in Seattle.
Oh wow.
And guess what? It took me 48 days to go across the United States and to follow her path. She was a big baseball fan, so I sort of ended up the journey in front of the Boston Red Sox baseball stadium there in Boston, and said, I think I'm finished. But I wasn't. Actually, every summer since then, I've been going across different countries like Iceland and Sri Lanka and Vietnam, all these other countries that we're talking about, raising funds. But in the process of doing this, I was learning about all kinds of people and culture, different countries, and so I use that as sort of a springboard for talking to kids about, in the same way for me, how do we grow? And we often have to go beyond what we know in order to grow, and sometimes something as simple as a bicycle can put us into situations like that. So that's sort of how I got into it. This will be the 10th ride coming up this summer across. This one will be across Norway for about a month, from Oslo all the way up into the Arctic Circle to the tippy top of
Wow.
Norway. And nowadays raising funds for tradesman scholarships
Hmm.
for the Illinois Manufacturing Association. This will be our third year in memory of a cousin of mine who was a big supporter and fan of mine, and she died of cancer a few years ago. And so we've named a scholarship in her honor, and we're giving out scholarships to people who want to go and learn how to build electric vehicles or do HVAC or anything that's related to the trades. So each one of these rides is connected with that sort of mission, that sort of motivation for me. But along the way, um, I you slow down, you go very slow on a bike, so you can't help but notice things, meet people, see things, smell things, uh, and stop, take pictures and so on. So that's just sort of all how it's sort of swirled into this thing. So, and I
That's
love it.
awesome.
Yeah.
is there something about the, I mean, so you talk about, having conversations with kids and giving them a presentation, or even just like seeing the world from a point of view that they're seeing it too. Like that's your first like glimpse of freedom was probably
Hmm.
from the a bicycle seat. And so is there something kind of magical about that perspective?
I think so. A lot of these kids, and I try and translate it into, do you ride a scooter? Do you ride a skateboard? What is your way of moving about? And you described it really well. That is kind of the first bit of independence for a kid to, eventually say, hey, Sammy and I are going to go, ride to the park and back, and letting people know where we're going, but, maybe doing it for the first time, not being accompanied by an adult. And I've had a bicycle all my life. And so I always had that chance to kind of get away from my piano, get away from my studio, get outside and so on. But to talk to kids about it, I try and translate it down into sort of an increasing level of steps. Kind of the very first thing I start off with is like, if you had a chance to go anywhere in the world at this point, right at this moment, you can take the rest of school off, you can take the next week off. Matter of fact, make it a month. Where would you go? And I don't tell them it has to be on a bicycle. I'll just say, where would you go? And they all start naming these places. Ohio, they're naming Ohio a lot in the latest shows I'm doing. Here's something they're watching that has something to do with Ohio. They're like, Ohio, have you been to Ohio? I'm like, no. I mean, yes, but not on a bike. But they name all these places, and I go, oh, I forgot. You get to do this. I'm going to wave a wand, and you're going to get to do it, but you have to do it on a bicycle. Would you still go? And the majority of them go, yeah, they roll with me on it, so to speak. And then we just kind of launch into it from there and go, okay, first and foremost, if we're going to live off of a bike for a month, what do we need to bring?
Mm,
What do we need to carry? And you get them starting to think about, oh, what am I going to take with me? Because I'm gone for a month now,
right.
and I don't have a giant suitcase like mom and dad have that they packed just to go away for 2 days. I got the limited amount of space, and I have a bike there to show them. And as they start naming things that I carry, I start pulling them out of this suitcase that becomes the launching pad for everything that's going on the bike. And any answer goes. Some kid goes, I want to bring my puppy. I'm like, great, let's figure it out. Name all these things. I'm going to bring Nintendo. Well, I bring a book.
That's awesome.
But it gets them excited about thinking about, if you're going to go somewhere and do it on your own, like you need to, what do you need to bring with you, and what's too much, and
Hmm.
what's just enough, and how do we get how are we creative? And we talk about creativity a lot. I talk about I'm a piano player. I show them a video of my band performing me at the piano, the whole deal, and then I say, and I'm always creative when I'm on a piano bench because I get to work with other people in different countries and I get to work with musicians. But I'm just as creative when I'm on a bicycle seat. I take that
Mm.
same creativity, but now I'm on a bicycle seat instead of a piano bench. How are you? Can you be creative with me today? I'm going to need your creativity to help solve some questions and some problems as we figure out how to go somewhere and how to do it. So I think tapping into the kids' creativity is, I know that all of you as teachers and all of your teachers who listen to this, because you do this on a daily basis, I have a huge amount of respect for the work that all of you do.
Well, what is some, I mean, I guess what is an example of some creativity that you've had from the bicycle seat? Like, I mean, if it's a story about a situation, I mean, I know you're a great storyteller, so like I'll just tee you up there.
Yeah, well, what I do is I let the kids kind of generate questions during the virtual show here in the chat field in Zoom. Teachers are typing in. There's always a ton of questions that are filling up the chat field here in Zoom, and so I'm always pulling questions. Like Sammy in Mrs. Phillips' class asks this question, and then I try and address Sammy directly. Or if Susie wants to ask the question directly through the computer and you can see them on the screen, then I try and make that as personable and as possible. Of course, in the live setting, it's even easier because I get to walk through the audience and point to people. But sometimes they ask about adversity, like flat tires and that sort of stuff, and how do you fix a flat tire? And so I quickly have a video that I can pull up showing how, well, I carry tools on my bike to fix my tires. It doesn't happen this fast, but here's how I have to fix a tire. What if we try and do that in another country like Vietnam, where I was getting a flat
Mm.
tire every other day because there's a lot more debris in the roads, and it was cheaper and quicker for me to give my business to a local tire repair shop and to see how they repair tires in Vietnam. But then let's extrapolate that a little bit further, and let's go to Sri Lanka. And now we're in the middle of a desert, and
Wow.
there's no town around, there's no people around, and I'm at a little bus shelter pulling my bike apart, trying to troubleshoot what's going on, and finally end up at a shop that a Muslim shopkeeper owns, and he opened his shop on that day in order to help me fix my tire. And just the whole non being able to speak the language, kind of the how do you express what it is that you need when you don't know how to speak a language. And so we talk a lot with the kids about, I run them through an exercise where I show road signs that I run across as a bicyclist, and we start with ones that they know. The stop sign. What does this say? What do we do? What about this one over here? And eventually I start moving towards symbols. And they're not noticing the shift that we're not using words at all. And then I pop a symbol on them like this and go, okay, what's this blue sign telling us? And they're like, oh, that's easy. That's a bike path. I said, so we don't need to know how to read Korean language in order to know what this sign is probably telling us. And then we just kind of move it along in other different ways in order to, figure things out. Of course, they always love it when the monkey sign comes up. But uh, I use these little opportunities to kind of to answer the questions directly as they ask them, to try and shift and move with where they're going with their questions, because I have enough material that I've developed to be able to answer these questions with either an audio visual thing if we're in the virtual setting, or we do it live, in the school shows. We actually, one example of an exercise I do is, okay, we've biked all day long. We're going to set up our tent, get our camp going, and now we got to cook some food. Where are we going to get some water? You know, and they have to think. And I said, okay, let's say that we're in Iceland, and so we talk about. I give them hints, like, where can I get water? And they're like, oh, you can get it from that stream right there. But before we do that easy answer, I go, well, where's that water coming from? And eventually they look far enough into the picture and go, well, from the snow in those mountains over there. I'm like, well, let's go up there and investigate. And now I had an opportunity to pop my drone up into the sky, but we're not on a mountain, we're on top of a volcano, I tell
Oh.
them. And I said, but this snow is here because this volcano's been asleep for, 500 years. And so should I just dip my water bottle in the snow here and get in the snow this way? And they're going, no, it needs to melt. And so we visit streams and rivers and waterfalls. And eventually we get to the point where I'm setting up my camp next to a stream. And as I'm talking about this, and this is rolling in the background, I get a few volunteers to come up with me, and we pull a water pump off of my bike. I have the janitor or the custodian bring over a bucket of water. And whether the school has a mascot that's a tiger or a lion or whatever, we're just going to say this is the Smithville Lions Reservoir, and we need to pump some water for our meal tonight. And so we go through the exercise of attaching the water pump to the bottle, and I get a kid to lower the hose into the bucket of water, and I get these kids to pump. And of course, it takes a long time to get that water bottle full, but we go through the exercise long enough to show how there are things that we have to think about when we put ourselves out there and move beyond the comforts that we keep in our circles around us, and get them to think a little bit about that, and to not be intimidated by that or thrown off by that, but to actually make it something that they can have an adventure with. And then eventually that applies to meeting other people and other bicyclists and people from other countries and making friendships. And how does that happen when you don't share a language in common, but you might share something else in common, like the other person's on a bicycle
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're going in the same direction you're going. I tell one story of being down in Patagonia, and I was, let's see if I can find this here. So normally these are all kind of lined up, but oh yeah, I was at a campground. And I'm just gonna skip ahead in this video, but I was at this campground and I was setting up my tent and I heard this instrument being played by another bicyclist. It was a didgeridoo, and I say, how many of you heard what a didgeridoo sounds like? And this guy asked me through Google Translate, what's your name? And I said, my name's George. He says, my name's Washington. And together, we are George Washington. And then he gave me the flag of his country, the flag of Chile, as a
Oh,
sign
that's
of
awesome.
friendship. And I use this as an example to point out other friends that I've met, friends from Japan and from Argentina, who, even though we might have a language barrier, we do find some things in common, like the fact that we're going in the same direction, we have to camp at the same place, we're making meals, we share our food with each other. And so each one of these things sort of kind of builds a little bit further out to encompass um, in a sense, you want them to think about, well, who's the adventurer in the classroom right around me? Who have I not gotten to be friends with yet, or sat down at the table with them in the
Mm.
lunchroom, or invited in into my group, into my little community sort of thing. And so I try and, by the end of that show, challenge them to say, hey, you don't have to get on a bicycle to have an adventure. You have people that you can get to know all around you, who come from different places or maybe grew up in the same town you did, but you never got to know each other. So I try and, depending on the age group, get that message, kind of across ultimately with the program.
Well, it seems like there's a
So
bunch of messages that you're sharing too. I mean, like that one in itself, but then even before, when you're even like the pumping of the water, and you think like, well, what happens if I just dump that water out or drink? Like that would be like, like we just pumped this for a long time to get all this
yeah,
water, and like the value of that versus like you see the waste around you. I don't know if you had interactions around that.
well, that's where one reason why when I saw your program on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, let's just see what Joel Amadon's up to, and I am not trained, or don't have a background as a teacher, though I've been in many education type settings for
Yeah.
the camp counselor to the whatever, but it's for a certain part of the year, where I've done a lot of residencies as a musician where you're working with kids. But I'm always curious about having someone like you or others, and I'm always asking the teachers who I've presented in front of, what else is it that you see that I could be doing in this program? Because we're talking about, broad ideas of character mindset and so on, and social emotional learning, things that I've sort of have picked up on and try and kind of, have be deliberate about with what I'm doing. But I always feel like, even what you just said there about what if we just dump that water out? One thought I had with the water activity is I ask them, often ask teachers, if there's any kids who ride to school, can I have at least one student bring their bicycle to the assembly? And then at a certain point, that kid comes up, and I've already put some bike packs on their bike, and some of my gear is on their bike. Like the food might be on that bike, but the water might be on my bike, or all the kitchen utensils might be on their bike. And so it's like, oh, do you have, and so the whole asking somebody, or to share kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, and broaching that and setting that as an example. But there's all kinds of different things that are packed, I'm sure, into all of these. And I'm just thinking about it and approaching it as a creative person, as a
Yeah, yeah.
person who, you know, works with video and audio mediums with my work,
Well, even
So
like the decisions that you had them initially make with regards to what you want to bring with you. Like, yes, you totally could bring your dog with you, but now you got to bring food. Now you got to bring it like, all this,
Carolyn thought she could
like,
fit a lawn chair on her bicycle.
yeah, there you go.
No, I have
Exactly.
jettisoned things before on my journey. I'm kind of like, what was I thinking? Even, I mean, and this is the 10th one coming up. I still have like this minimalist list of, like, you only need this many, layers of clothing, or whatever. And of course, with Norway, I'll be up in the Arctic Circle, so I'm going to have to be ready for some, and Iceland prepared me for that. The interior, being on a fat bike in the interior of Iceland for a couple of weeks, really taught me about,
Which for those only looking at the audio
isolation.
version, if the video, hopefully we get a video version of this, like
Oh yeah.
it looks like the moon. I mean, it looks like Mars. I mean, it's
Yeah, well, as a matter
ridiculous.
of fact, one of the stories, the video stories that I talk with the students is we go into the interior of Iceland. We talk about volcanoes and um, how can life come back after a volcano has obliterated a sheep pasture and filled it up with all of the things that volcanoes throw out into the atmosphere and onto the ground. And eventually we find life in the middle of this desert, and we find water sources. But as we're taking in the whole starkness of the interior of Iceland, NASA actually brought a number of its Apollo astronauts to the interior of Iceland to a volcano called Askja. I actually camped at the base of this volcano and went up to the top of it. It's dormant, and they trained there to do their geology for rock collecting on the
Oh
moon.
wow.
So they, and then the Perseverance rover that's on Mars right now, the prototype for Perseverance was tested in the interior of Iceland,
Oh wow.
and so I show prototypes of that rover working in the interior of Iceland, and I make that connection between Iceland and Mars,
Mm.
and even my drone that I'm using in the interior of Iceland, I can compare it to Ingenuity, the quadcopter that's on the Perseverance rover,
Oh,
and
that's
we
awesome.
show the two of them side by side doing the work that they're doing, and you get kids to think about. I end that story by saying, hey, maybe you're going to be the first one that set up a tent on the planet Mars.
There you go.
Ride a fat bike across Mars. So
That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and even too,
So a
like,
lot of it, a lot of stuff graded related to imagination, just to kind of cap that off there.
yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
even just like the creative solutions that you've provided. I think, I mean, and I think I caught this from a video that you designed the bike. You made some, you had the bike custom made for you, that you could like generate your own electricity. You could
Yep.
do some other things. So I know, like, I think kids, I would assume like you get a lot of questions from kids, like just like on this, almost like you're almost like Tony Stark, like designing your own little bike here.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is my first adventure bike here. This is Golden Bursty, and Golden Bursty, like all my adventure bikes, has a dynamo hub in the front tire. So as this tire rolls, it's generating electricity, and then I got a USB port right up here on the upper stem. And when I have my shows running, I usually have a USB cable attached to this, and I pull out a battery pack, or I get kids to guess how many hours it takes to charge up an iPhone by riding a bicycle. And so I show them how I'm generating electricity, saving my electricity, and using it so that I don't have to use batteries or anything like that. The other two adventure cycles that I have, the lights on them are generated by dynamo hubs. So during the live assembly show, I get kids to come up, we lift up the front of the bike, and I have one kid madly spin that front tire, and then the light starts flickering, like, where's that coming from, and they're trying to get them to realize it's not an electric bike, that the energy is coming from the person who's on the bike. And so why do we need to eat our oatmeal in the morning,
Yeah,
because I
yeah,
show them how they're like, because it's going to give me the energy to run the
yeah, yeah.
electricity. And then we translate that to solar power. I use solar power in my bicycles. I charge up a lamp that I hang in my tent at night, and so that's always in the back of my bike charging up. I'm experimenting this summer with a little solar cook stove. That only weighs 2 pounds, and it's this glass tube with some reflectors on it, and it kind of packs down really nice and tight. And I've been learning how to boil water with it and to reheat some meals, and I'm trying to decide whether I want to try and do that in Norway or, of course, then the questions from the kids is, well, what if the sun's not shining? Well, then what's my other alternative food source?
Hmm.
And do I have that, and will I have that, or do I just eat cold food, cold
Yeah, yeah.
oatmeal? Sometimes you got to eat cold oatmeal,
That's right.
But yeah, well, we talk about energy, we talk about solar power, we talk about wind generators, and I show them video footage of, from the vantage of the bicycle seat. Here's these big wind generators in Ireland or in the Faroe Islands or wherever it is that I'm at, and we get kids to think about, um, you know, what the word sustainable means,
Hmm.
renewable means, and even when I was in Iceland, I spent a month on an island off the north coast of Iceland in the summer of 2021. I was spent 2 months in Iceland that summer. The first month was as a composer. I was doing a composer's residency in an old schoolhouse on this island that had been renovated into an artist's enclave. There were supposed to be 4 artists there that month. Pandemic, the lockdown had just opened up, and they were opening it up to international travelers. And I'm the only one who got the protocols right. And the other 3 artists unfortunately didn't show up, so I had this whole schoolhouse to myself. But twice a week, I would bring all my recyclables down to the harbor, to the big community recycling bin that had about 8 different categories. Like you really separated your stuff out
Wow.
there.
Yeah.
But I filmed it once and I did a little film thing like going down the hill and here we go and here's how we separated it out and batteries and they separate out candle wax and so on and then ask the rhetorical question, how do you recycle at your own schools and so on. So I try and look for stories actually sometimes as I'm writing or consider the possibilities of different angles in order to bring stories back with me um, when I do these adventures or even as I study a country in the months leading up to going on a journey. I go, oh, I'm going to be passing by the world's largest ball of twine, whatever. uh, let's go film that and turn that into a story we find hopefully worthwhile things to do.
Yeah.
So
Nice. Well, and I was
yeah.
wondering, like, one of the things again, I like pointing back at that overview video because I was wondering, like, hey, what are some things that you've learned throughout? And it feels like you've got these like principles that you've come on, these like takeaways, I guess. And the first was on embracing the unknown, which I think it seems logical here, but I mean, still with thinking about embracing the unknown, like what stands out to you that made that like your the first one that you list on those takeaways?
I think that one of the things that's really I realize has happened to me, and I always thought I was like a really calm, laid back Midwestern guy, you know,
From
and
Sun Prairie, don't you know?
from Sun
Yeah.
Prairie, Wisconsin, educated by Benedictine monks, most jazz musicians are pretty laid back. But I realized just how much it, people put it this way, and I'll get embracing the unknown. Is related to this. People go, "Aren't you bored to death? How long? You're on a bike for what, 8 hours out of a day, and you're moving how fast?" And I go, "Yeah, 8 to 10 hours, And I kind of like in between the lines go, "Yeah, you burn about 4 to 6 thousand calories in that amount of time," and then they really pay attention. But I realize as a composer I sit down at a piano with a poem in front of me or some text that a librettist has given me, and I have to sort of meditate on that text and what it means and who the characters are, what the storyline is, what the intent is, whether the librettist and I have talked about it, if we're creating it for a music theater thing, which I do a lot of. Um, but I eventually, at a certain point, I have to enter into the unknown and place my hands on the piano and form a chord or start thinking of a melody line. I have to commit myself to putting notes on a page, notes which will change and get adjusted and moved, and maybe the whole idea gets thrown out. Some, I could say, written, I don't know, a ton of songs in 40 years of composing, and I would say maybe only 3 or 4 of them had like bad first starts, and I scratched and decided to go a different direction. Like I always kind of like know what it is that I want to do, but it's still the unknown. It's still something that you have to commit yourself to just doing it. And I translate that to being on a bicycle. I translate that to the kids. It's like, yeah, we could sit here and be comfortable in our own little circle
Mm,
and do our own little routine, or you know, and of course this translates even in a greater view to trying to listen to all the different sides of a story, even though they might not be your side to a story.
yeah.
And of course we're suffering mightily from that as humanity, with that inability to listen. And the monks taught me how to listen. Listen with the ear of your heart is the first phrase in the order of the rule of Benedict. And as a jazz musician, I'm listening all the time, and I'm listening to what another player is saying first and foremost, because it's a conversation, and I have to wait till they're done stating, what they're pulling out of their vulnerable inner selves, and then um, react to that in a way that incorporates something of what they said musically and incorporate that into my response. And I find myself doing that like in these school shows, like with these kids, is like really waiting them out, listening. And I know, like, again, hats off a million times over to all the teachers that deal with all that energy every day. But like some kids, you can tell they drank a ton of red Kool-Aid just before they came to the assembly on purpose. I don't know what, but they're like bouncing off the walls. I always say with the principal, what's the secret code that gets them all quiet at once? And one of the best ones I ever heard was out in California. She says, simple. All you have to say to them is, after high school, and they all go, comes college. And then they all sit there and quiet down, And I'm like, great. I wish every school used one of these. But in those situations where, all of that energy is happening, I try and do my best to listen. And going into the unknown, embracing the unknown, it involves listening, because your senses, do have to sort of be projected forward when you're on a bicycle, for example. One of the examples I use in my program is I actually use some of the railroad tunnels that have been turned into railroad rails to trails in central Wisconsin, between Sparta and Tommy Thompson's hometown,
Elroy.
Governor Tommy Thompson's Elroy, the Elroy Sparta State Trail,
Hmm.
and along that corridor are three old tunnels that these bike trails go through.
Long tunnels.
Long tunnels, and
Yeah.
they're dripping, and there's moisture, and there's no lights except what you have on your bike, or what you can see at the far end. And so we go on an adventure where we enter one of these tunnels with the bikes, but we slow it down, and I start asking, what do you notice is changing? And of course,
Mm.
and you can see the fog and the moisture by the light of the bike. You can hear that we test out the echo in there, and so on. So it's a little bit of a combination of physics and science and biology and geography, kind of slip their ways into this, but it's all about getting kids to kind of notice these little unknown things being experienced from a bicycle, where you don't have the windows of a car around you, you don't have a radio that you can turn up, you can't block out the world. You have to confront it.
Yeah. Well, I love. I mean, I love the embracing the unknown, just from the aspect of thinking of the opposite. What happens if you don't? Like, then
Hmm.
you're where you're at. Like
Hmm.
like it is like the boring sort of thing versus like how do you uh you know take advantage of these opportunities that have been given to you, right?
Yeah. I was a college admissions recruiter my first 4 years out of, I went to St. John's and University and the College of St. Benedict up in Collegeville, Minnesota. My first 4 years, I was an admissions recruiter in inner city Chicago and all of Wisconsin. So I probably visited your high school. And uh, I remember being at a traffic light in the south side of Chicago one day, and I was looking at all the billboards in the neighborhood, and on all these billboards were advertisements for cigarettes and alcohol and bail bonds, and I had just been in the affluent suburbs just before that, and I remember seeing Lexuses and jewelry and vacations, on the billboards there, and all of a sudden this just stark thing hit me. I'm like, wow. Um, what am I being sold,
Mm.
in terms of what I take in? And so I threw my TV out in 1990, about 2 years into this admissions adventure, learning to work with inner city Latino and African American youth, and to talk about what it meant to transition to a rural, college campus with mostly white North Dakota farm kids, as the majority of the, and so what did we need to do as a university, as a program, in order to, work with these transitions? And that's sort of, I think, where the seeds where a lot of this started. But I remember distinctly kind of going, I don't need a TV,
Mm.
I'm going to just, so I became more of a of a radio person, and more like, public radio or adventure theater or mystery theater or the stuff in the imagination of the mind, and listening. And so, not everybody takes that route, but I just decided, yeah, I don't need to be sitting back and being entertained by something. I'm gonna try and go out and create my own kind of connections and adventures. And I don't know all the different ways that kids can approach that, but I guess it all comes down to that one teacher that we have, or that one class, or that one experience, like riding a bike across the
Mm,
country. You know,
yeah.
yeah.
When you say like, and I just want to get the other principles, but like leaving our comfort zone changes us, or change invites new challenges. And
Hmm.
I just want to say, even from a teaching perspective, like the leaving our comfort zone, like I know how to, like the kind of, and just story time for me is I knew a certain kind of how to teach math. And a big joke at Boy State was Joel never has a job, but I finally got a job. That was great. But
I remember that.
yeah. So, but I had my job, and then, but that job was different in the fact as the math teaching, it was not like, at the chalkboard, like you were like having groups engage with some material, and you were facilitating them engaging with that material, and then like offering a prompting question, or getting, kids to talk to each other. And like, and it was really outside of my comfort zone. I had no idea, like what, it didn't feel like teaching, but it really was creating environments for them to do the learning, and it was teaching. It was just different. Like, and it
Hmm.
was way outside my comfort zone, but I embraced it. And like, it was like one of those things that was just an eye-opening experience about, oh, this is what it could be. And then that did change me and who I was as a teacher. But it was getting outside of my comfort zone. Like, whoa, I'm turning over the power of my class. Like, the chalkboard is not that powerful a place. It's like the agenda, and that's about it. Or maybe working out, having a kid come up and work out a problem. It could be,
Hmm.
the way it's being used. But that was a unique thing. And the fact is, like, that, we have, teachers sometimes that are challenged, are looking for that next challenge, like on how to expand on what does it mean to be a teacher. And just like, well, just like student, what does it mean to be a student? It's not just about, taking the test. It's about maybe, demonstrating learning in different ways, and kind of
Hmm.
doing what you're saying. That's like stepping out and doing some different activities.
I had one school in California. We're so excited to have Tales from a Bicycle Seat, and this was a virtual show and it was right around this time of year, so they were kind of gearing up for the summer and summer adventures and so on, and they wanted sort of the bicycle theme to be one of those options for kids to think
Yeah, yeah.
about. You can have an adventure on your bicycles this summer. So they made it Tales from a Bicycle Seat week at the school,
Oh,
and
that's
the
awesome.
kids had a board in the hallway that you put stuff, bulletin board that you put stuff up on, and they did a creative project where all the kids spearheaded bicycle adventures and variations on what would I do if I took a bicycle adventure, and put it up on this board, and then sent me pictures of it just before my show with them, so that I could actually zero in on some of the stories that the kids had written about, and even some of the names of some of the kids, so I can personalize the show. And we got really excited about, I got really excited about riffing off of the work that they had already done with their imaginations, imagining what this program was like. And it really kind of made me just engage even a little bit more. It was just really fun just to have a school kind of get into it that like that. And I do have some schools, and we're talking about, with change comes challenge. I do have some schools who, because they know that I've done, a lot of, and you might have been there at Boy State at the time I was teaching environmental
Yeah.
ecology,
Hmm.
and that was something that I just raised my hand and volunteered for one day, and they went, "Yeah, we lost our dean of ecology. He couldn't show up this year."
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
"I'll teach it." Um, but some schools asked me to kind of riff more just on that theme, and so for me, the challenge is to kind of dig further into my material, or to find examples of what people or other cultures are doing, other countries are doing to address environmental change, and global change, and warming and so on, and to not make it a heavy thing, but as much more to make it a creative thing that we welcome other people to be creative about too.
Yeah, and even to see like how other countries are attacking the problem,
Mm.
and how, humans are creative and
Yeah, one
yeah.
example I use in Iceland is when we visit one of the visits, we visit a geothermal park. They actually have some towns in Iceland because Iceland is, grew up out of the ocean because we got two tectonic plates rubbing against each other. We got a hot zone, a hot spot, and so there's all kinds of volcanic activity in Iceland. And Icelandic people are like, yeah, yeah, okay. But there's some communities where like they'll have a park in the middle of the city and it's bubbling and there's gas coming out of the ground and there's sulfur and these little mini fumaroles, which are hot jets of steam shooting out of the ground, and of course water that you can put an egg in and boil it within a minute in the water. But we talk about, I show these kids how the Icelandic people harness that energy and use it to heat their water in the tap. They use it to run the registers, the heat registers in their homes. They heat their swimming pools with it. They even heat greenhouses with it because you can't grow anything more than potatoes, and
Mm,
moss
yeah, yeah,
in Iceland, and so they grow vegetables. And between geothermal power and hydroelectric power, I talk about a country that 98% of its energy is renewable. Not every country has that ability to do
yeah,
that,
yeah.
but it's just to show the creativity of these people and to extrapolate that back to say how can we be creative here in our school and our homes and so on. Um, yeah, every one of these situations is different for me, which is what I love.
Well, I love that you get a chance to use your creativity. I mean, it almost sounds like, they're like you talked about this school that asked you to riff more on the environmental aspects of it and like having the experiences and then, you know, rearrange. I imagine like you have all these like, these jazz like skills and aptitudes that are just being put into play where you're like, oh, I can just place this there and put this there, like, and turn this up a little bit. And
It's sort of true, my dad just turned 90 last week, and I was as we were sitting there celebrating and catching up on things. I said, "Yeah, Dad, I find myself improvising with some of these younger audiences, and using some of the tactics that you used with us kids,
Mhm.
redirect our energy."
Redirect. Yes.
Is the way
Perfect.
I call it, because we've all of you have teachers, more so than myself, but have the situation where you're trying to, you got this lesson plan, you got the things set up, and the whole class is there, and it's right after lunch, so they're bouncing off the walls or they're falling asleep, whatever it is. But there's that maybe group of three, Of course, when it's someone new like me, they can get away with it. When it's you, I know they're not going to get away with it. But there's like these three kids like decided they weren't interested in the program, so they had their backs to me and they're kind of formed their own little group in the front row. And the after high school comes college phrase wasn't working, and the teachers weren't lifting their fingers to help me. I was on my own. And so I was getting ready to bring some volunteers up, and as I'm talking to everybody in the room, I knelt down with this group next to them, still talking, but I joined their circle. I got in there with them. I kind of scooched myself in and I said, "Isn't that right?" And they looked up at me, realizing that I had asked a question, and one of them said, "Oh yeah." I said, "That's great, because I knew the three of you would want to volunteer for me. Come on up here. This is great. Hey, let's give them all a hand." You know, and these kids, blindsided, got up and sort of broke the group up, and I brought them up for an activity and involved them in something that helped them participate a little bit more, and of course make them rock stars to their fellow students because they got
Hmm.
to go up and be with the bicycle, right?
Yeah.
They went back to their places and maybe they paid a little bit more attention. And in that same group, there was this little girl in the back, God love her, and just off the wall, and we were doing bicycle safety, and so I was asking everybody to participate by suggesting what we need to know about bicycle safety, and she had her hand up, and I somehow had missed it, And I was just wrapping up the show. I was just writing the final thank yous, and I want to thank all of you. And she came marching straight up the aisle, came marching right up to me, put her hands on her hips, and she said, "You didn't answer my question. You didn't ask." And I said, "You know what? You're exactly right, because I was waiting right for the very end of the show here to have your question. So ask your question, and let's see what I can do to answer." And she said, "Well, I forgot." And I said, "But I bet it was a great question. Let's give a hand to everybody who asked their questions today." But those improvised moments, where you don't know what's going to happen, and
Yeah.
I love riffing off of that stuff. I definitely use my jazz skills, and being a band leader for 8 musicians who, the moment they walk onto the stage, the setup for the show that we're going to do that night, I can tell what kind of day each one of them has had, because I've known them that many years.
Hmm.
And I know exactly how the show is going to go because of what kind of day they had. And I also know which one I'm going to make solo first, because they're going to want to get that bad day out of them by blowing through their horn
Yeah.
or playing their guitar or banging on the drums. And I go, "You go," and then they just, and it's a redirection of energy, is what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
like almost, I mean, to, I know we're going to talk about everything that people need to know about Tales from Bicycle Seat if they were interested in a show for themselves
Oh,
and
sure.
to
Yeah.
learn more information and stuff. But also, too, I think, George, I really think there is something here about teaching, because
Mm-hmm.
over and over again I keep coming back to this idea that teaching is improv, and like thinking about, or even thinking about the, all the different things that you're playing in, like how do you, where's the energy in the room, the energy might be with these guys, these people that are not paying attention to me. All right, how do we redirect that energy into what we're trying to do to accomplish the goals that we have, and like
Mm-hmm.
getting more thinking like that versus like rather instead of thinking of it like improv, thinking of it like a play, like it's just going to go no matter what, the same beats every single time, versus like, no, 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 this is, we're playing with energy. We need to tap into creativity. We need to put these things in together in order to get accomplished what we want to. And knowing that you weren't expecting the student to come marching up and saying, "Hey, I have a question," versus that could have been, you know, there could have been a way that you played that would have just, not taken advantage of that energy, would have just like left a bad taste in your mouth. But versus like,
Yeah.
that ended up being a congratulations for everyone that has a question, even though the question was not even remembered. So like there's some definite stuff there with regards to thinking about just teaching in general.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's a member of my jazz group who's 83 years old now, and I'm the age that he was at when he joined my group. So he was
Wow.
57
Yeah.
when he joined the George Maurer Jazz Group. He's now 83. His name is Jim, and when we go on the road or we go and do gigs, everybody's just quietly on Jim duty, because Jim will sometimes wander into the wrong bathroom, or will forget where the stage is or whatever. But he's a performer. He's knows all. He's like comes out of the vaudeville school. I mean,
Mm.
he'll tell jokes for 8 hours in the car, and never the same joke, and it just, you
Hmm.
don't. Where do you get these one-liners, Jim? But he's been known to steal a solo from any number of us at any point, because he can't see as well, and I park him near me at the piano so that when I can go like this. But if I'm going to the horn player next to him, I have to be locking eyes with the horn player, and if they're not fast enough, Jim's going to think it's his solo, and he'll start blowing on his horn. And my signal to my band is, I'm going to take a solo, is I just put my head down and start into the keyboard, and everybody's supposed to read that sign, as George is going to take one now. Jim can't see, so he'll all of a sudden he'll take it, and I look back up like this, and look over at we exchange eyes with the guys in the rhythm section, and they're like, "Yep, you just got punked by Jim again." But that um, points out to me situations where, yeah, I mean, you don't want to, obviously, you don't want to embarrass a student.
Hmm.
You want to, in a certain sense, when you um, have a student ask a question, or have a student come up and participate in an activity or whatever, or students, you're turning the reins, in a sense, over to them, and helping them teach the very thing that you're trying to teach.
Yeah.
I mean, I can stand up there, or I love the virtual shows, but I really love the live shows even more because it's in 3D. You got the bike there in front of you, and
Hmm.
and I try and I mean, it's wonderful with the technology that I have with overlays and being able to seamlessly move from scene to scene and so on, and create these really, I mean, really utilize smartboards for what they're made for, when we do this program and make it interactive. But there's something about just being able to, I can read an audience within the 20 seconds it takes me to walk on stage to get over to the piano. I know what kind of audience I have.
Hmm.
When you're doing virtual and you got 50 classrooms in front of you on the screen and they're all muted, um, it's hard to get a bead on your audience, or to riff off of a particular signal that a student's saying, hey, I've got a great idea or a question and I want to
Hmm.
get your attention. So that's why I have to rely on the teachers a lot more
Yeah.
for that.
Well,
What was the question?
no, I do. I just think that there is something to be learned there about just the using the and just even what you said, that last piece there about turning over the reins, at
Hmm.
times, and like just like you turn over the reins to some, and some kids just like Jim might steal a solo every now and then. But you guess
Yep.
what? That's still, it's part of the show. It's part of what
Yep.
you're doing, and like just using that and going with it.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
what is, I mean, so you've done these shows for a while now. So what is the best thing you've learned, or things that you've learned to help you teach better? We might have already touched on it, but maybe you want to emphasize it, or maybe you got something else to share.
I think the things that I've picked up on in the live, in-person shows, one of the goals I have is to actually to rely less and less on any technology. That this
Mm,
virtual setting allows me to do all sorts of really cool things. With a little slip of a button here, I can, move from scene to scene and talk about different things, really seamlessly. But when you're in the live shows, I still am plugging into a projector or a screen behind me, and have the same ability to advance through these scenes, but I'm relying only now and then on what's behind me. What I'm trying to actually do more now is to rely on sound,
mm,
and to use the sound of a brook or a raging river, or elephants or different animals that I'm going to run across, and using my ears as one sort of exercise. And the rest of it is just sort of building an adventure from the ground up, and starting with that blank slate and going, where would you go? What would you bring? And let's load the bike up. Let's find ways to pack this all on the bike, and let's practice getting to a camp and setting up. And where's our food coming from? Where's our water coming from? How and so there's little parts of the program that I'm still kind of fiddling with, and kind of going, well, I could do this over here, I can do that over there, but I want to try and have settings where now I can be outdoors, in a picnic shelter during the summer, giving an afternoon program, which I'll be doing in July out in Pennsylvania, and flying out and doing 2 shows. No, no screen, no projector. I'll have a small sound system with me. But what are the components that I'm too reliant on just showing something on a screen
yeah,
versus storytelling,
yeah,
which I love doing, or those types of activities that will engage a group of kids to do an activity. So I'm looking for more kind of activity kind of based things. If any teachers out there have some ideas, I'm sure you'll give contact information for me at the end of this podcast. I would love to hear ideas on that, because I'm always looking to um, to make the show even, more genuine in that aspect. So.
yeah. Well, like the things that you're talking about with regards to like your changing modality. So that was a big thing with the pandemic when we moved from a lot of face-to-face classrooms, went online, and like
Mhm.
we talked about this idea of resilient pedagogy. So like where like the kind of teaching that is agnostic around the modality, right? So
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm small PA, no screen in Pennsylvania under, in a park
Yeah.
versus like on Zoom with all the bells and whistles, and like still being able to have integrity for the kind of show that you're going to be providing. Again, there's some teaching lessons to be learned there, George, about like what you're trying to do, and again, especially with regards to thinking about engaging
Yeah.
and engaging with who you're teaching to. It's not like it's the same show. It's different because you're the 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 people within it are a part of who's contributing to it, right?
Yeah, definitely. This whole thing got started. I was coming back from a month-long bikepacking trip across Patagonia and Argentina and Chile. So this was February of 2020 into March. And literally, the day I took off from Buenos Aires to come back, I was sitting next to the road manager and a lot of the band members for Maroon 5 because their tour had gotten canceled and they were all heading back and everything was shutting down. And so I just slipped this adventure like under the wires. And of course, I came back and as a performer, I gradually we were getting all of our shows canceled, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden you're looking at an empty year. Um, and 30 years ago, I had worked for this academic entertainment agency. It was actually my first full-time music gig coming out of college. So I was leaving admissions, going full-time in the music, and I was doing an educational program in high schools, elementary schools, junior highs about music and technology. So it was with
Mm.
my synthesizer, it was showing how do we sample sounds, how do we create music, and I was doing like 10 to 15 shows a week from
Wow.
like northern Minnesota to San Antonio, Texas, from Chattanooga, Tennessee to Denver, Colorado, and everything in between. It was the entire middle section of the United States. And did that show for 1 year and then had other opportunities, turned it over to a friend of mine, and he's been running it ever since. Same show, but with his own spin on it. And that agency lost all of its edutainment shows because the schools were locking down. But he said we can turn this into virtual because he knew all the technology. He knew how about using. I'm using a DSLR. I have a shotgun mic that's right below, out of sight of the line of the camera here. Of course, you've seen the overlays with everything I'm doing, and I'm using my own creativity. Um, but I was able to take all this material that I had already accumulated over 7 years of bike rides
Yeah.
at that point, and stuff that I was already bringing into some sixth grade classrooms in Oshkosh with a colleague of ours in the Boy State program, and he was having me come in once a year and talk about Iceland, but to bring the bicycle in and talk about to his sixth graders about the movements of goods, ideas, and services across a landscape. But so I was already sort of doing this, and so it was the opportunity for me, since I had all this time on my hands,
Yeah.
to be creative with all this GoPro footage and drone footage that I had filmed and stuff that I was using to tell people while I was raising money for cancer research, and using those video stories to tell the story of being on the road and what I was learning in whatever particular country, and going, well, now let's use this to create even something more in depth for this program. And so, as you were saying, I was just sort of kind of going, what are people going to be interested? What are students going to be interested in? They're probably going to want to try and get out behind the confines of their houses now, or the
Yeah.
kitchen nook where they have to, in that first year, be on the iPad to learn their lessons from before they all got back to school and getting masks. So for 2 years, this program was an escape, in a sense for everybody who's just had that cabin fever. But it was, a good educational escape.
Yeah. Well, even too,
It
George, just
certainly
thinking
was.
that some of the things that you're teaching as well, like from coming out of pandemic where, I've got a young kid who's, hey, wear a mask and be careful, wash your hand, and like almost having a fear of the
Mhm.
world versus like, hey, we can get out, and embrace all the unknown, leaving our comfort zone, all the principles that you're teaching, and we need it. And so I think that's a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I love doing it. A real quick side story in Vietnam, there's certain parts of Vietnam, the air quality isn't good. So I was in markets and bazaars and people are wearing masks, but this is pre-pandemic.
Mm,
And as some of these images are coming up in some of my shows, I'm like, oh, by the way, why are these people wearing masks?
mm,
Like I just asked directly, and we talk about, that, environmental air quality and that sort of stuff, depending on the age group. But this is pre-pandemic, or showing a picture of a railroad engineer. And before one of these Wisconsin tunnels, there's a historical marker, and there's a railroad engineer with a mask on. It's like, why is this engineer wearing a mask. Think about that, and then ask your teachers to type the answer into Zoom. And these kids would like, oh, that's because there was soot from the coal being burned by the
Mm,
train. You know, some science kid in the class had the answer, and so it takes that image and turns it into something else, redirects it into something else. Um, in some instances, hitting it head on, but from a different angle. You know.
yeah, different context. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, George. This is amazing, like
Yeah.
being able to share
Yeah.
all this stuff. But I want to make
Yeah.
sure to give a specific time. We'll definitely put again a link to the overview video, but then we'll embed it in our show notes. But then we'll also
That's
put a
awesome.
link to the talesfromabicycleseat.com link
Yeah.
there. But what else can you promote, or what else
Um,
or anything else you want to promote?
mainly, I just would be really interested in any teachers that have some ideas on how I can use a bicycle in a live assembly, not as a form of entertainment, you know, because the kids ask me, "Hey, can you do wheelies?" No, I'm 57. You know, can you do tricks? Like no, you know.
Yeah,
But to somehow, I think some sort of activities like I've thought of changing a tire. That still takes time. You might lose an audience with that because you can only get a few people come up. But I'm wondering if there's something or some sort of activity that can be demonstrated that you can use a bike for. That can be a kind of a fun sort of this should be in every show type activity. So any of your teachers have any thoughts on that? I'd be very open to it. And don't go to talesfromabicycleseat.com. That website's there and up and running, but it's sort of static right now. But if you want to learn more about the program, go to academicentertainment.com
there we go.
and then just look for Tales from a Bicycle Seat. And
Okay,
yeah,
we'll do that. Well, thank you, George. Thank you so much for the time.
this has been fantastic.
Fantastic.
And it's great to talk with you, Joel, and congratulations to you on your new gig and enjoy the weather down there in Mississippi.
Yeah, thank you.